And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Doctorpreneurs podcast. My name is Dr. Lim, and together with me is my co-host, Andrew Mastrandonis. And once again, we have a very special guest. I think I would consider him to be part of the pinnacle of the aged care industry in the US. Andrew, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah, we're really excited to introduce Tom Grape, the founder and CEO of Benchmark Senior Living, which is based in Massachusetts in the US. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, you have about 60 senior living facilities in the US and over 6,000 employees, I think. Is that about right?
65 communities, but about 6,000 employees, correct.
Great. So as I said earlier, this is sort of a back and forth about your business and how you came to where you are today. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get this started over 25 years ago.
Well, I was actually in senior living for 10 years before starting Benchmark. So I was around in the I was one of the ground floor of assisted living when assisted living was in its very, very early days in the US, and thought it was just an idea that I saw the potential and how exciting it was, given what the alternatives were at the time, which in the US were really, you had a choice of being in a congregate living building, which was our term at that time for independent living, or a nursing home.
Right.
And so there were just a few of the sort of more modern assisted living buildings, just a handful of them at that time. And you could, to me, I saw them and I said, this idea is just going to take off. So I teamed together with some folks, and we actually wrote the legislation that became the law in Massachusetts for assisted living, and built the first several assisted living communities in Massachusetts. I was one of the founding members of the National Trade Association, later became its chair. I founded the State Trade Association in Massachusetts. I really was on the ground floor of the assisted living movement in the US, and it's, of course, now it's a big business. But I just saw that idea, and it was one to me that was a very exciting potential, and it's been a great ride.
So what was the trajectory from when you had your first one and then the next few and the 10 and 20? How did that go over the years?
Well, at the time we built the first few, I was with in a different group. We built 14 of them in about a 5-year period. Then that group, which was a subsidiary of a larger company, the larger company got sold. So that's when I then started Benchmark. That was in 1997. So that's 25 years ago. So then we're now up to the 65 at Benchmark. So we had to take a little sidestep into 96 to start Benchmark, but it's all been good.
Right. Just a curious question to you, Mr. Tom. Like, what was your background before venturing into your first senior living or aged care industry?
Yeah, a lot of folks in our industry come from either had close relationships with elderly relatives or something that I didn't really have that story. My first job out of college was at Procter & Gamble marketing consumer products, Bounty and Pampers, believe it or not. And then I sort of shifted gears into real estate. The real estate company called me one day and said, do you want to move to Boston? We're starting a new subsidiary to develop retirement communities. I knew retirement communities were going to be a booming business over the long haul. And I also really wanted to move to Boston. I was in my mid-20s. And so I jumped at it, and that was 35 years ago. I started that subsidiary for them, and then later joined this company that I described where we built the 14 communities. And again, until that was sold, and then started Benchmark in 97. So I did not have a background in healthcare or a background in elder care, but got sort of just serendipity that I was introduced to it as a career opportunity and got bit by the bug, and I've loved it. And it's been a great great career choice for me.
Right. Assisted living is a fairly new term in this part of the world. How would you describe assisting living compared to other types of facilities for the elderly?
Yeah. It's described here frequently as being, along the continuum of healthcare options. So starting, there's a big boom happening now for what are called active adult communities, which are what we think of as sort of the typical golf course community, which is maybe a
Right.
single story townhouse, and basically the absolute minimum of services like security and maintenance, period. Then the next level up might be independent living communities, which are typically more apartment buildings, but a full-size apartment with a kitchen but some services, perhaps a meal per day, some housekeeping, some transportation, minimal activities, but people are still independent. But they're starting to slow down. They want to downsize from their house. The next step up in the continuum is assisted living, where the apartments tend to be smaller. They usually have a kitchenette, not a full kitchen, and the service level increases. So people are then starting to get 3 meals per day, some care, typically it's 45 minutes or so per day, housekeeping, laundry, transportation, activities, and so on. And those residents tend to need help with a few activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, grooming, et cetera, perhaps, and usually some help with being reminded to take medications and sometimes a good bit more. The next level up from assisted living or a type of assisted living is specifically for folks with memory care, early stage dementia. The next level up from assisted living or memory care assisted living would then be skilled nursing, and so on. So that is sort of the continuum of care as we think about it here. So again, as I described earlier, assisted living really didn't exist. So your choice was to move from independent living to skilled nursing back 25, 30 years ago. And that was a huge, a huge jump. There was this gap. And so assisted living has sort of filled in that middle position. It's been a great boon for many people.
So where's Benchmark sort of on this scale between independent living and skilled nursing? Are you more assisted living? Have you seen some movement to skilled nursing? Where are you sort of now, or where have you been sort of transitioning to?
Well, some of our communities do have independent living units. Most of our communities are assisted living communities with memory care, a memory care wing. We do have 11 communities that are exclusively memory care. And then we have 4 communities that are the continuing care retirement communities, which means they have independent, assisted, memory care, and even a small skilled nursing component. But the bulk of what we do is assisted living with memory care assisted living. But even within that broad category of assisted living, some people tend to only want to serve a less frail population, and others, including us, are willing to serve folks with higher acuity. And so even within the broad term of assisted living, there's a range, of course, of frailty and acuity and willingness, what level of service people are willing to provide. And in fact, some states regulate assisted living with different tiers of licensure. So for example, New York State is a state that we happen to operate in, where you can get a basic tier of licensure or an enhanced level of licensure within the category of assisted living. A number of other states do that as well. So there's assisted living, there's sort of different flavors of assisted, different levels of assisted living.
Got it. So what makes more sense from a business perspective? I would see challenges in doing more sort of skilled nursing and working with clients who are more frail. Does that add different dimensions to the business? Is that, as a business person, what makes more sense to kind of grow in based on the market needs, the regulations, and all of that?
Well, I guess one important distinction I would make between what we do in skilled nursing is that our businesses are all privately paid. So they're all paid by the resident or the family. So independent living, assisted living, and memory care assisted living are pretty much all privately paid. There are some small exceptions to that depending on each state and so on, but none of them are paid for by Medicare, which is the federal program. The skilled nursing is very different. Skilled nursing, as you know, can be largely paid for by Medicare, and if not, then by Medicaid, which is that's a very different game. It's a whole different business from where I sit. We don't do freestanding skilled nursing because of that. Government reimbursement is just a whole different business. So, so to the question of high acuity, I guess, which is, it's a business decision. I guess it's a good business if you know how to do it well.
Right.
But there are some implications of it even beyond that, which is having a higher acuity population can be a little bit of a deterrent to people, to prospective residents when they come in to your
Sure.
community. If you've got a frailer population, they may say, well, geez, I don't want to live here. I'm not ready for this. If they see people who are higher acuity and more frail. And so you have to know how to run a community like that, where and how you're marketing a community like that, so that you don't turn off prospective residents, and or you're marketing to the right group of prospective residents. And the other hand, serving a higher acuity group can be a good business proposition, because nobody wants to go to a nursing home, and these are much more residential communities in style and service delivery and the like. So they're far preferred, obviously, for those who can afford it, which is, a meaningful chunk, but not everybody, a meaningful group of the population, but not everybody. So you're right, there's an art to it as well as
Right.
a science to it.
So do you see people transitioning from one of your more independent living facilities to assisted living to skilled nursing? Is that a big part of your business? I'm just kind of wondering, do people do assisted living for 5 or 10 years and then move to something else? Maybe they want to go back to a home or something. I don't know. I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah. Well, again, I mentioned we do have 4 what are called continuing care retirement
Right.
communities, which have all the levels on one campus.
Sure.
And that's premised on the notion that you move in when you're independent and you have the higher levels of care if you need them. And a number of folks do move to a higher level of care, not everybody. In our communities that have assisted living and memory care, some percentage of residents do move from one to another. Sometimes couples move in, or one might be in assisted living and the spouse might need memory care, for example. So we do see some movement through, to a higher level. Your time frame's interesting, because our average length of stay in assisted living and memory care assisted living is really more like 2 years.
Mhm.
So there's a fairly high level of turnover. And in our continuing care communities, the campuses with all the levels of care, the independent living residents are more like 7 years. And then if they get started going through the continuum, again, the time frames shorten for those higher levels of care. The average age of our assisted living residents is 86.
Wow.
So it's an older population. And even in our independent living communities, the average age isn't a lot younger. They're just healthier.
So I'm curious, Dr. Lim, what's our average stay and our average age? And we're more nursing homes, I would say, than assisted living, right?
Yeah, I think in Malaysia, the gap between it's pretty similar to what US was a few decades ago, which is transitioning directly from independent living to nursing homes. And I think we do, the age range is pretty similar there as well. And I noticed, Mr. Tom, that you mentioned a few times that you built these facilities. Does your company own these facilities, and do you build them yourselves as well?
We do own them. We have capital partners who invest with us, but we do own them. And of our portfolio of 65 communities, we've built about half and we've acquired about half. But we do build communities, yes.
Well, I guess that's when your previous real estate experience comes in handy as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
I still like tinkering with the plans. I still like, I enjoy the development process, yes.
Right. So what's sort of the average square footage of your facilities? I'm just curious.
Well, the average square foot per unit is, plus or minus 900 to 1,000 square feet per
Okay.
unit gross. So, and our buildings range from a small of about 50 units for a freestanding memory care only building, to our largest campus is about 400 units.
Mhm.
Our typical building is in the 100 to 110 unit range.
Right. And do you see that staying like that, or do you foresee a change in the coming years for larger campuses? How do you see that going in the future?
My expectation is we're hitting the baby boom generation.
Right.
in the U.S. where they're the adult children now, which means they're the buyers today for their parents. They're just about to start turning into the group that's going to start moving in as residents.
Right.
And as we all know, the baby boomers have sort of turned everything on their heads that they've touched. And so my expectation is the baby boomers are going to want in their senior years all the full array of choices they've had throughout their lives. So they're going to want, whereas 10 years ago, let's say, senior living in the US was probably 80%, 3-story buildings and 5-acre lots in the suburbs.
Right.
The baby boomers are going to want high-rise urban, they're going to want mixed-use developments, they're going to want multi-generational developments, they're going to want, you name it, they're going to want every possible flavor they could possibly have. Again, all the same choices they've had throughout their life, they're going to want in senior living. So I think we're going to see a huge array of different kinds of buildings being built, different services being offered than we've ever had before, different ways to pay for it. I think we're going to see a tremendous proliferation of new kinds of buildings and services and all kinds of things starting to be developed now. We've started to see the early stages of that just in the last couple of years with some very high-end urban buildings coming on board, with some couple of gay and lesbian communities coming on board, with mixed-use communities starting. So we started to see some early steps in that direction, but we're going to see more and more and more variety coming in terms of buildings and services and so on in the coming 10 and 20 years.
So would you describe your facilities now as mostly sort of suburban residential?
Yes, I would. Yes.
And do you foresee yourself moving in the urban direction or other types of facilities and other surroundings down the road? Do you see that happening?
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
We're again, I think to keep up to meet consumer expectations going forward, we're going to need to mix up our game. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity personally for my competitors who view that as a threat. Good for them, but for companies who view that as an opportunity and who embrace this new direction, I think it's going to be a really exciting period coming up. So we view it as an opportunity and one we're embracing and trying to think about different ways to approach these next coming 10 and 20 years.
Right.
Right. Maybe some questions about your operations, right? What are some of the biggest challenges you are facing while operating such facilities in the US?
Well, right now there are probably two principal ones. We're still in COVID recovery mode, so we still have some cases of COVID. They're pretty low, but we're not completely post-COVID, but it's de minimis compared to obviously where we were, a couple of years ago. And also our industry took a good hit in occupancy levels during COVID, and we've not fully gotten back to pre-COVID occupancy levels as an industry. So we've made good progress, but we're not quite back to that yet. So we're still dealing with COVID. Again, nothing like the crisis period of 2020, but that's still with us. The big issue that we're facing is labor. Is the workers have vanished. So labor is very hard to get. We've had to do several broad-scale wage increases. We're utilizing outside agency staffing at a number of our communities, which is very expensive because we just can't fill positions. So the labor market in the US, as you know, is very tight, and applicant availability is very difficult. And we've worked very hard over the years. We have a very good reputation as being an employer of choice. We've won a number of awards for that. And yet we still have a very difficult time recruiting workers at all levels, but frontline in particular. So, and with inflation being what it is at the moment, pay keeps having to go up. But so labor is number one.
Are people just leaving the industry? Are they going to competitors? What are they tending to do?
They seem to have vanished, as I said, because every industry is having this battle. Yeah. Every restaurant you go to, every retail store you go to, every every factory, everything
Yeah.
is going to. You go into any restaurant or many restaurants in the U.S. and they'll say, "Please forgive us for slow service. We're short-staffed," or they close on days that they wouldn't have closed before because they can't get staff. So this is not unique to our industry. It is across every industry in the U.S. The workforce has. I don't know where everybody's gone, but it's a problem not specific to Benchmark or our industry. It is endemic throughout the labor market in the U.S. at the moment.
Well, you'll be happy to know that we have similar labor issues over here as well. So
Oh,
it's just
sorry,
not the U.S.
I was going to see if you could send some folks over to help us out.
Yeah, probably it's a worldwide issue. But like speaking of that, like what are your policies on foreign workforce in your work staff?
Well, we have many immigrants in our workforce. We have a very diverse workforce in all respects. So, including from their country of origin. So, we have our workforce consists of folks who speak many languages and come from many different countries, and that's part of the richness of our country, of course, but of our workforce today. So we'd welcome anybody who wants to come on over. We'd welcome them.
Maybe we should talk to them later on about foreign labor from this part of the world, because as you probably know, there are a lot of Asians, Filipinos, Indonesians, even some Malaysians that come to the U.S. for nursing jobs, caregiver jobs,
Sure.
a variety of medical jobs.
We employ a number of them today. So we welcome more if they choose to come this way.
Yeah.
Right.
And what sort of qualifications do you require your staff to have to work in the assisted living facility? I think nursing homes, of course, you need more nurses and medical staff. But what kind of qualifications do you need for your assisted living staff?
Well, we employ 800 nurses, so we need nurses.
Right.
But our principal challenge for us is our frontline caregivers, and for that, it's a certificate to be a CNA or an RCA, or the terms used here. And those are certificates that one can easily get when they arrive here, and we can help people get them. It's certain hours of training and so on. Doesn't require a degree, requires a certificate that one can get when they arrive here, and we can help facilitate that. Nursing, as you know, requires degree, which is not what the frontline caregivers requirements are. So that's something we can help facilitate and help people get.
Yeah, right. I was just looking through your activities calendar, and they're very comprehensive. I think that is probably the most comprehensive activities calendar I've seen among different nursing homes, even comparing to Japan or different parts of Asia as well. How do you manage to handle all these activities? It's like back to back, there are activities going on in your centers.
Well, first of all, I take that as high praise, so thank you. We want to give people an array of choices for what they want to do. We're trying to make sure that we're meeting people where they are, and some folks will want to do more things than others, and some folks will want to do more active physical things, and other folks will want to do more active cognitive things. And we want to have an array of choices for people to do. We do sort of keep track of who participates in what, so we can sit down with their family, for example, and talk about who is participating and who's not, and how we might be able to help meet their needs and so on. So we have a couple of staff people on at each community or more who are our programming staff who put on those activities, and we rely on volunteers to help as well. But our company purpose statement is to transform lives through human connection. So our whole mission is about getting people to connect with one another, both residents, families, and our staff, our culture. So programming is an essential element of facilitating that human connection that we think is the central calling of our company.
Right. I'm just curious, getting back to sort of planning facilities, do you sort of create a yearly or a 5-year plan about where you want to open new facilities? And then once you sort of have a plan, what are some of the key factors you look at in opening new facilities?
Um, we do certainly look at the markets we'd like to be in, where there are desirable demographics and hopefully a little bit less competition and the like. I guess I'd say that's probably about where our planning stops, because beyond that, it's very difficult to predict the timing of the development process, or in the case of acquisitions, we don't know, of course, when an acquisition is going to become available or not. We've had development projects where we're trying to build from the ground up. Obviously, some don't get through zoning approvals, and we can't, and the project dies. We have others that take as long as 5 years or more to go through approvals. So the timetable for developments is or acquisitions is very unpredictable. But we certainly do pick the markets we'd like to be in and target those. And we generally would like to have at least 2 or 3 developments going each year. But sometimes they sort of get bunched up because of the timing of how the development approval process works. And sometimes we go through a period where there's less openings just for the same reason. So the timing is unpredictable, but the markets we're certainly very, very picky about. You had a second part of your question, and I forget what it was.
Yeah, I do too, I think, but I think you answered it generally. So when COVID hit in like March 2020, did you have projects that were going to start or in progress that you needed to slow down, or how did that affect the development process?
We had one project that we were getting ready to start. It slipped by a couple of months, but still started just a little bit later that summer. We're getting ready to open it actually in a couple of months now. Otherwise, it didn't affect other development projects which were going through approvals and so on. So it affected, it slowed down one by a couple of months.
Right. So I noticed you're mostly in sort of the Northeast and New England.
Yeah.
Is that for a particular reason? Have you thought about other sort of baby boomer markets like Florida or Arizona or other places?
Yeah, we have. And I've always described our geographic footprint as being Boston to Washington, so that Northeast border of the country. We actually just broke ground on a project in the Washington, D.C. area just a few days ago, actually. The reason I've liked that market is it's about 25% of the U.S. population, so it's a big market. And the socioeconomic characteristics are very different in the Northeast and on the West Coast than any other part of the U.S.
Right.
It also has higher barriers to entry. Land is more difficult to get, zoning is more difficult to get, but there's more affluence and so on. So as soon as you go south of Washington, D.C. into the Carolinas or Georgia or Florida, zoning is very easy to get. The net incomes and household net worth is very, very different.
Right.
The same is true of the Midwest. So I like the geographic concentration of our communities. It's easier for us to shift staff around, to do collaborative marketing things. It's an easier business to run than when you have to jump on an airplane to go all over the place. We can drive to all of our communities within hours. So it's a much more manageable business. And we're in a very big market with the best socioeconomic demographic characteristics in the country. And it has served us well. So we've been offered countless opportunities to go to Florida or the Midwest or China, Australia, South America, you name every place. We've turned them all down because we like the market that we're in and think it's been a good strategy that has served us well.
Right. So even if you could go to, say, south of Washington, D.C., you probably couldn't get the kind of room revenue you can get in the Northeast. And I guess even if you could build facilities cheaper, maybe that's not even possible. I don't know. But it sounds like you want to stay in a certain income demographic for your company.
Yeah, you're right on all counts. We probably couldn't get the room revenue. We probably could build cheaper, but we couldn't get the room revenue. The quality of staff is different.
Right.
somebody could build right next door to us, tomorrow, because the barriers to entry are easier. It's just it's a different business, and we're very comfortable with where we are. There's a big market. We're in a big enough market. There's a lot of room to do things, and we got plenty to do where we are. So we're good. The only exception to it, if we bought a portfolio of, I don't know, 15 properties, and a few of them happen to be outside our geographic footprint, we might do something like that, but it wouldn't be. It would be as a tail onto a deal that we liked that was principally in our region. It wouldn't be, to go do deals outside our region.
Right. So are your competitors, a lot of them focused on the Northeast as well, or how does the competition break down in terms of their geographic focus?
Well, in the New England states, we're the largest. We're more than twice as big as the next company in terms of property count in New England. So we're by far the market leader. There are national companies that are that are bigger than us nationally, but in our market area, we're by far the largest in the markets we're in.
Right. So with 65 facilities now, in 5 or 10 years, do you want 50% more, double? Sort of, where do you see the future?
We've always talked about growth as being something we want to do to get better, not bigger. We're not trying to build an empire. We don't want to get to 200 communities or anything like that. We want to grow only at the pace that allows us to invest more in our infrastructure and resources that allows us to improve our quality and get better. So we do want to grow, but I think at a moderate pace that is a controlled pace, and that allows us to invest in our infrastructure and resources. So, I could see us over time getting to 100 communities, but there's no rush to do that. I think we'll do that over the next several years. And when the timing is right to do deals, and we'd like the deals, we'll do those.
Right. Without getting into a lot of details about COVID, and I read some articles related to Benchmark, but maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what you experienced or how you felt during that time period. And then what do you think your company learned and what the industry learned as a result of that?
Well, I guess one thing I learned is that crises can come out of anywhere at any time.
Yeah.
And instead of the old crisis management playbook where you think about the traditional things that, you got to be prepared for anything, anytime. So that was one lesson that sure stuck with me. We learned a whole bunch of things about coping with a pandemic and about infection control and about, all kinds of those things that I won't probably go over with your group. I think we learned a couple of lessons that maybe were most instructive. One was the importance of transparent communication.
Sure.
I'll give you a couple of examples of what we did that really worked. We literally sent out a letter every day in each of our communities whenever there was a positive case diagnosed, or if somebody passed away. We would send a letter out to every family member for that community, telling them there's been a positive case diagnosed, or sadly someone might have passed away. So we have 60 some communities. So we were sending out thousands of letters during the peak period a day. So in some cases, explaining that there was a positive case diagnosed here, and it was the logistics of that. But people so appreciated that we were upfront, we were current, we were telling them what was going on. We earned big points for that. At the same time, we were holding town hall meetings, we called them, where we would offer a Zoom call like this, where family members could sign in, and we would be telling them very candidly, here's what's happening, here's what we're doing about it. They could ask questions. They felt, again, they appreciated the candor about it. At the same time, we were proactively calling the regulators at the states, telling them, here are our numbers, here's what's going on. They hadn't even asked for them, but we were sharing with them proactively, here's what's going on, because we're the largest provider in Massachusetts and in Connecticut.
Right.
And we were calling those regulators, telling them, here's what's going on. At the same time, we were also calling our congressional representatives, our members of Congress, telling them, here's what we're experiencing. Here's how you can help. Here's what's going on. One legislator was quoted in a newspaper article as calling Benchmark the pinnacle of transparency or something like that.
Right.
So we got big points for the fact that we were just constantly communicating. When people weren't even asking us, we were telling them, here's what's going on. We were reaching out to people. It cost us a lot of money because we had to hire extra staff to be doing this, but it was absolutely the right thing. And it was, even when we had bad news, we were telling everybody at the moment, and I can't reinforce the importance of, and a lot of our competitors were not doing that. And it really distinguished how we handled things versus others. We earned a lot of credibility and a lot of trust by having done that.
I'm really glad to hear you say all this because we went through something pretty similar in Malaysia as well. And definitely being honest with our clients and their family members has served us well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, so I don't know, those are a couple of comments I guess I'd offer.
Right. Did that make you think longer term about sort of the staffing and the type of people you have in place to deal with future situations, future crises?
Well, it certainly made us aware that we have to have a ramp up capability that, God forbid, if there's another pandemic or large scale crisis, that we have to be poised, which we were not in 2020, to ramp up our communications capability very quickly so that we could be prepared to do something like that again. We had to invent it at the time in 2020 because we were not prepared for a broad scale effort like that.
I think we all did.
Yeah, that's right. So, but the principle of transparent communication, we've practiced before, but we've sort of learned that, in spades during that episode. But the how we ramp up the scale of it, we learned during that time.
Do you think that's changed at all people's willingness to think about assisted living facilities or nursing homes?
Well, nursing homes are different. Nursing
Right.
homes got a lot of bad press during COVID in the U.S. Senior living, assisted living included, did not. And in fact, we actually did a survey of our residents and family, really our family members during the fall of 2020, and 87% said their confidence in Benchmark and what they thought of Benchmark was better than it was pre-COVID. And this is after the real crisis period. So kudos, that was great news. And what we were all, the whole industry was wondering, well, geez, because we had closed our doors for months by, either by choice and in some cases by state requirement. So, and the industry's occupancy had dropped, as I said. So there was a real question: how were people going to react when we reopened our doors? We saw the last 3 quarters of 2021, we saw the highest level of leads, tours, and move-ins than we've seen any time in our history. So the question about will people move back into assisted living, in my mind, was answered. And what we've learned is that obviously people are asking questions now they didn't ever ask before. They're asking about infection control. Those words never were asked pre-COVID. But we also found that there are just as many people who might have been concerned about infection control and living in a group setting during COVID. There were just as many people or more who had been taking care of mom and dad or who had been living alone. The issues of isolation and the issues of caregiver burnout were even more of an issue. So when the doors reopened, as long as we could satisfy them about infection control and the like, they were itching to move in or move mom and dad in. So any concerns we had about senior living being not okay were put to bed. And as long as, again, we could satisfy people on the infection control issues, quite the opposite. People were more welcoming and more interested in senior living than they had been before.
Right.
Nursing homes, different story.
Mm-hmm. Switching our focus a little bit from the past to maybe a little bit towards the future, like technology is beginning to play such a big part in our lives. And what are some of the innovations or technologies that Benchmark has implemented or is implementing or is planning to implement to kind of like enhance your service offerings?
Well, you know, there's so many people doing so many things on the technology front, and so many are really very interesting. A lot of them, in my mind, are still at the sort of gadget phase, and are not yet exactly what if they'd asked us, here's what we need. But there's some brilliant and fascinating people doing things. Again, I start with our company purpose of, as I mentioned earlier, transforming lives through human connection. So my great wish would be for things that can help us with human connection. There are some things out there that are that help with that. So we're doing very basic things. For example, putting TVs that we can communicate with in each of our communities, so we can send messages about various things. You know, very simple technology, but that's a starting point. We're looking at how we can communicate with all of our associates. Again, very simple, but not all associates want to download an app on their phone. They don't like that idea. And so we're wrestling with very simple things like that. There's a lot of robot efforts out there, and some are more further along than others, and they do some things more than others. There's a lot of fall detection, you know, and systems out there. Again, some are very rudimentary, and frankly, it's less helpful to me to know that somebody has fall. It's when we get to the point of somebody predicting me when they're going to fall, that's much more helpful to me. And there are people working on that. I think one of the needs that I'm particularly acutely interested in these days is we have our customer data is all in very fragmented places. And so it's very hard for me to say, here's the profile of all the residents in a given community or in our company wide, because we have to pull things from all different sources, and there's no integrated way to do that. Nor can I tell you longitudinally. I can on electronic medical records, but I can't when you also want to include financial information and, you know, all the different sources. So somebody to pull all that together would be a great boon for us. You know, telemedicine, of course, is advanced quickly through COVID. That accelerated the timetable of the adoption of that in senior living. There's a lot of neat things. I saw some pitches last week about some new, very innovative cushioning technology that looks very cool. Some, you know, I could go on. There's so many people focusing on this now, including 10 years ago, you never would have heard Apple, Amazon, Google talking about aging. Now they've got major initiatives doing it, and it's obviously in everybody's dashboard or you know, plate of activities these days. So we're going to see so much activity in this space.
It's interesting, though, with all this technology and the possibilities that when it comes to the problem of labor, you still have to go through sort of the traditional sources in order to find labor or go to agencies now. No one seems to be able to provide a pipeline for labor, given how hard it is right now.
There are some people who are working on that problem. There's some people who are knitting agencies together. There are people who are creating sort of virtual agencies. So there are some people who are trying to tackle that problem. And it's a tough problem, so I'm not sure anybody's quite licked it, but there are some people who are clearly working hard to try and see if they can tackle that problem and be helpful.
Yeah, without getting into all the details, we've actually built some technology similar to that here, and we're launching it fairly soon. Maybe I'll send a demo to your folks to have a look at it.
Please do. We're all ears.
I certainly look forward to one day robot caregivers that can come in and kind of like replace the human, but I don't think that's going to be possible anytime soon, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all the questions I've been wanting to ask. Andrew, do you have anything else from your side?
No, this has been great. It's been really interesting to sort of compare and contrast what we're doing here versus what you're doing in the US. And while our businesses are a little different, that we tend to be more nursing homes and home care, it's still a really interesting perspective. And we really appreciate that, Tom.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation. Hope it was useful.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Nice chatting
Tom.
with you.
Yeah.
bet.
See you.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.